Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Hey.
Woo! We now have sound effects with our
Yeah. That was just a
newscaster.
one-time thing. That was a one-time thing. So
That's
maybe.
you telling me, look,
Yeah.
simmer down.
I can't keep track of
Don't-
all of our things, you know?
So many things, so
Yes.
little time. Well, you know what? One thing that we keep track of is today is Muse Day. So happy Muse Day, everyone. He is Dan Kent. I'm Shawna Boren, and we are so excited to be with you today talking about the sermon. And this is me filibustering. Oh, the problem with Palm Sunday.
Hey,
See?
all right. Yeah. That's
I got
awesome.
it.
Well, did I
Oh,
tell you what I wanted to call it?
no.
So I wanted to call, because like Palm Sunday, of course, is when the crowd, they put palm leaves on the ground, and then and that's the opening of the Easter week, and that's the first bookend of the Easter week, and then of course the climactic bookend is the resurrection, and that is where we put our palms to the sky. So I wanted to call the series
Oh dear.
Palms to the Ground, Palms to the Ground, Palms to the Sky, palms to the ground, palms to the sky, and you can have a little dance with it, down da 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 da.
Oh,
And
wow.
but can you believe that got
Ah.
voted no, like unanimously?
I am shocked.
I
Shocked, I
know.
tell you.
I tell you.
That did not make its way through the approval process. I just don't even know. Well, you know what, Dan? You can palms to the ground, palms to the sky, all you want during today's show. I will allow it.
All right, good.
No, but seriously, you guys, Dan Kent drove in from across the country. He's been here for the week, but I'm gonna say what he won't tell you, and that is somewhere. I don't know how. I don't know what he did, but somewhere driving solo across the country to make it back to Minnesota so that he could be here for Palm Sunday, Holy Week, and Easter, and all of that. He caught a little cold or a little virus or a little icky sicky. Again, he was alone. He was driving in his car, and somehow he caught something.
Yeah.
And so, Trooper Duper Dan, what you know what you plowed through, and you blessed us with a great Palm Sunday message, which is not something that we typically do at Woodland, and so I'm so thankful for it. And so I want to say thank you, good job, thumbs up, palms to the ground, palms to the sky, all of it. And I would love for you to, this is the way it's going to go. I want you to give your summary. If you want to explain how on earth you got sick all on your own, while you're traveling, you could do that. But then I heard something about 12 pages of notes that got left aside. And so I feel like we have some things to discuss today, and I just want to give you ample opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the drive, I drive pretty aggressively. I try to do it in 2 days, so that way I have fewer like hotel stays. And I know, I think I know. Then suddenly you start to get in this, I know who it is. I know who got me sick. And so I think I do know the place, because this guy was like coughing all over the place, and he was like at a Starbucks, and it's just like, go through the drive-through, man. Come on.
No. Yeah.
But it's interesting because I also got COVID in 2020 coming back, and by myself. So, that's, I think, I'm in my vehicle most of the time, but it just takes, just a little bit. So
just one little thing. That's right.
yeah. But you know what? I was excited to, and by the way, I felt fine on Sunday in terms of like physically. I was good, several days before. However, it did affect my preparation, because like normally I'm done with like the content of my sermon by like Thursday, and then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I'm just like changing my notes to make it more natural and more easy. And this time I didn't get to that phase. I didn't have like shortcut notes. I had like just the written part that I wanted to talk about. So I didn't feel as in the moment. And so whatever happened on Sunday in terms of the presentation of the sermon was all the Holy Spirit, because I did not feel in control of anything. And that's a weird feeling to, be in front of that many people and not have any idea what's going on, and just trusting in the Spirit and your notes and your preparation, because it was a weird thing. So I don't like that feeling. But I loved talking about Palm Sunday. And so Palm Sunday, the sermon, the angle I wanted to go on is, well, I had a lot of angles, and that's part of the like my surprise that we haven't really done a lot of Palm Sunday stuff, is because I just feel like there's so many angles here. However, I do think that how we have done it in the past is Greg has included a lot of the Palm Sunday elements as he's spoken of resurrection. And so it's funny because I was like telling the team, I'm like, okay, well, I'll do Palm Sunday, and then Greg is going to do the resurrection, and he can talk about, like defending the resurrection and give some arguments for it and stuff like that. And so I'm like, okay, cool. That means that I can talk about everything that gets changed in the resurrection. Well, it turns out that he likes to do that too. So we'll see what he's going to do. He might just be standing up there blinking, at the lights. So we'll see. Yeah,
He'll
I'm
just
sure he'll do.
he'll just go, "He is risen."
Yeah,
and then
that's
that
right.
is
Yeah,
it. And then celebrate, and we're done.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So what I did is I really wanted to focus on the crowd, because that is where the Palm Sunday stuff comes from. They're the ones who laid the palms down. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe that's kind of where we should focus. And so I looked at how God's people had been treated, and what their experience was, and what their life situation was, and just how they'd been under oppression for so long, and by Rome finally at the end when Jesus came, and just why it was particularly profound that there was this Messiah. There's these rumors of this Messiah, and how their hopes got so high, and how that sort of bled over into their expectations of what that should look like. And the problem with that is that God disappointed those expectations. Jesus did not fulfill the expectations that they had, because Jesus has his own agenda. He is king on his terms, is the way that I put it. And so Jesus comes in and he rides on the donkey. He fulfills this prophecy in Zechariah 9:9. And so that just gets everybody excited. And then he has the whole Easter week with the cleansing of the temple, and the Last Supper, and the betrayal, and all of that type of stuff, which we'll talk more about during the Easter week. And then he's arrested. And by the time he's arrested, and Pilate brings Jesus out with Barabbas to the crowd and says, "Who do you want me to release, and who do you want me to crucify?" The crowd suddenly wants Jesus crucified, even though just a few days earlier they had been putting palm branches down in front of him on the donkey, shouting Hosanna, calling him Son of David, which was sort of a way of saying that you are the Messiah. And so in just that short time, they did a total 180 on Jesus. And on one hand, it's shocking, because how can you go from that much adoration to that much contempt in such a short time? But then on the other hand, I totally believe it, because look at what the crowds do in our time on social media and in the world, and it's just doesn't take much. And crowds are fickle, and humanity is fickle, and I tried to empathize with the crowd also, that I understand why they were frustrated. And there's so much hope put into what they thought God was going to do. And this idea that Jesus is the Messiah, and he can't even resist being arrested by these Romans, it doesn't look good. And the fact that he's crucified, that doesn't look good. He's not even putting up a fight at all. And he's preaching things like turn the other cheek and pay taxes to Caesar. It's like, well, how are we going to beat Rome like this? It doesn't make any sense. And Jesus even acknowledges that, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand what's really going on here. And at that point in the story, I wanted to communicate how dire it looks, like how it's not something that I would recommend to believe this story at this point. Like, I wouldn't, if I were there, I would be part of the crowd that didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And I understand people like Rabbi Skobek, who is this rabbi that I was listening to his teaching, saying how it doesn't seem like Jesus is the Messiah. And that is why the resurrection is so important, because the resurrection shows that Jesus really does satisfy this sort of absurd explanation that he came to defeat death, which then opens up the gates for all of these other kind of explanations. Like, for instance, Rome is not the ultimate enemy. There is a bigger beast. And that's evidenced in the fact that Rome is long gone now, and yet we're still facing these problems. That Jesus came to defeat sin, and that the crucifixion was actually a victory. And so that's sort of the angle that I really wanted to look at, is just how dire things were before the resurrection in terms of Jesus as Messiah and so forth. So then I just concluded with, well, I gave some thoughts on how, if we believe that Jesus is the Messiah now after the resurrection, well, we're called to make him king, which means that we're part of his kingdom, which means that we should be living under his constitution, which means that we need to imitate Jesus, and we need to live according to Jesus. And that's sort of what discipleship is. And that's not easy, because in the same way that Jesus is meowing against the roaring Romans, in a sense, we're called to face this harsh world with prayer and service and self-sacrifice, and that's not easy. It's a really tough call. And but the resurrection keeps me, at least, steadfast in my efforts to get better and better at that. And then I just left with a couple impractical takeaways. And mostly I focused on the fickleness of the crowd and how can we avoid that fickleness. And the two kind of takeaways that I had is, the first one is we need to pursue anti-fragile faith. And what that means is that the crowd had these expectations of how reality should go. And their faith then was hooked to the outcomes of the world. And that's problematic, because the world doesn't even go the way that God expects it to go. Why do we think it's going to go the way that we do? That doesn't make any sense. And so a better way to do that is to rest our faith on God's character. So no matter what happens, we can trust that God will turn it into gold somehow. And that's a better way. And when we do that, we can start to rest on his promises that he will wipe away every tear. Not that we won't have tears, that he will wipe away every tear, that he will what's the other one? He has a plan for us that is so glorious and so wonderful that it makes our present sufferings not even worth comparing. And of course, that implies that we might have present sufferings, and that we trust that he has conquered death. And so we don't have to be bullied by that fear of death that so easily bullies us. And then the second takeaway is to just be explicit, because Jesus is so explicit in what he does. He's intentionally riding on the donkey to say, this is who I am. This is who I am. And I'm making it obvious, and I am the king. And that is an invitation for us to either accept him as king or reject him as king. And there's something transformational about being explicit, not just saying, oh, God knows where I'm at. No. He wants to hear it. In the same way that Bartimaeus was blind and he says, help me, Lord. Obviously, everybody in the whole road knows that Bartimaeus wants to see. And yet Jesus asks him, what is it that you want from me? It's important that we are explicit, and that does something to us. And I think that that's really important. And so that was sort of my summary of the sermon. There's a lot more there that I would have liked to have explored, of course, but that's how it ended up. So and you were gone this weekend, and so you just were able to listen to the sermon this morning, and so it's fresh in your mind. What did you think of how it went and everything?
Yeah, I really do think you did a great job. I am really thankful that you felt led, you felt prompted to kind of tap into and dig into Palm Sunday a bit. I'm going to say one funny thing first, because I thought, of course, Dan Kent's going to pull a Columbo at it during his sermon, because at the And you were like, okay, in closing. And then you're like, okay, but just one more thing. But just one more thing. I thought that was so great. Yeah. So we were traveling. We had to take our son back to Chicago, which meant we were leaving in like when the snowstorm was coming here, and then we were coming back in intense rain and fog. And so it was insane. And so I didn't feel like trying to listen, like with the intent of like fully absorbing what you said was going to be wise. And so I did wait until this morning because we got back late last night. And so yes, it is very fresh in my mind, but you got Columbo in there. And so that was a good surprise.
Cool. That's cool that you caught that. Papa J also caught that, by the way.
Did he? Oh, good job, Papa J. Good job. Just one more thing. Okay. So yes, I love that you focused on Palm Sunday, the beginning of Holy Week. And I really love that you focused on the crowd, because I will say, and I don't want to say too much because I think that'll tap into nugget time later, but I will say that they really are, they were having main character energy. I don't know if you've heard the young folks say that, but they really were having main character energy.
I have not heard that. That's funny.
Yeah. They were just like, this is about like us, like finally we are going to be saved. We are going to be delivered. We are going to be redeemed. Unless I sound like, I have zero sympathy for them. That's not true. I have immense sympathy for them. I thought you did a great job of explaining just the reality of their situation. And they were kind of like, finally, Hosanna, we are being saved. We are being delivered. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Finally, we are going to get back at those Romans. It reminded me of a time so I have 4 kiddos, but when we just had our first 2 young boys, and all of our kids are very close in age, but number 1 and number 2, they were young. And I remember some sort of kerfuffle had happened, and number 2 was really upset at number 1. And I was, trying to console and figure out what's going on and just see how can we reconcile and remedy the situation. And I'm like, what can we do to reconcile? And he was like, punish him. And like, he just wanted retribution. There was nothing that would matter to him beyond seeing his brother being punished. So we had a nice chat about love and reconciliation and grace and all of that. But anyway, but that's kind of when you were speaking of the crowds, and, Pilate brings out Barabbas and like, I can release this guy, this scoundrel, or this, this guy. And they're like, no, punish him. We want the scoundrel. We want the rebel. So just wow. This crowd, main character energy indeed. But the challenge that you gave us, that, if this is all true, if what we believe and what we are saying is all true, and what we're leading up to during this Holy Week is like the grand, glorious finale, that means that Christ is our king. And when he is our king, we are a part of his kingdom. And that means trying to bring as much of his kingdom on earth now as it is in heaven, as we are trying to live for him. And that means we kind of have to look at some things that we believe and do and pursue in different ways. And it is not easy, and we are not promised the easy life. We are not promised our best life now, but we are promised ultimate victory. And I will say, because I know you have other things that you had to leave out, and I want to give you time for that, but I I felt like a lot of your descriptors were just very, well, they were great descriptors. Like when you talked about, Jesus just, kind of meowing at the Romans. They were expecting this ferocious, like kick tail, and now they're going to get theirs and blah, blah. And he's just like, we're not going to do that. That was great. It just, you painted a great picture, and I really appreciated it. And, I think that we have the benefit of history and hindsight, where we can look back and go, Oh, them of little faith. They just
Yeah, right.
didn't get it. But man, oh
That
man.
is the danger. You're right. That is the
Yes,
danger right
right?
there.
It
Yeah.
truly is.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to do that. But man, if we just pause for a moment, we can see how we too act in such ways. And so I loved it. I want to thank you again for your sermon. I thought it was great, great start to Holy Week. And
Yeah.
I think it was really good.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You have to. This is a Shawna, be honest kind of question. Did you learn the word kerfuffle in Minnesota? Is that because I don't think
Did I
that's a
say that?
national. Yes, you said kerfuffle. I don't think that's a national word. I think that's a Minnesota word. I don't.
That's wonderful. Well, I probably did. I don't recall growing up saying kerfuffle. So you guys, does that mean I'm becoming more and more Minnesotan?
You're local. You're local.
Palms to the ground, palms to the sky.
That's good. That's good. Well, hey, I do have some stuff that I cut out, and
Yeah.
I didn't organize all my trimmings, so I'll just say a couple things, and then we'll see where that goes, and then maybe
I
we'll
love
just
it.
do the nuggets. But
I love it.
the first thing that I really wanted to spend some time on that I didn't really get to is just this idea that this is the danger with the type of kingdom that we're called to and the type of citizenship that we're kind of supposed to strive for is that it's very it's nonviolent, it's very power under, it's a servanthood sort of kind of leadership and ministry, and by the world standards it can seem very passive, and I don't think that it is, but it can look that way. And I also think that for a person who is sort of a minimizer, or someone who tends to avoid conflict, and I say this with a little bit of a smirk because that's me. I don't like conflict, and I tend to minimize things. This type of call can sort of reinforce a habit of escapism, and it can sort of like be it's a way of just staying away from all that stuff. And so that's sort of the danger with this. And it can easily be kind of wrestled into an attitude of not caring about like society and what's going on in the world, and how people are being oppressed and things like that. It can be sort of like this escapist thing. And I know that I have that tendency. So, and so I say this as someone who has to listen to this and think about these types of things. However, what I would say is although I think that's a danger, I don't think that that is inevitable by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, especially when you start to look at doing this and living this way by putting your faith and hooking your faith to God's character and God's promises. And because, that stuff about that Jesus has conquered death and he tells us not to fear death, that he holds the keys to death. So much of the drive to escapism and the drive to avoidance has to do with fear. And because I think we all want to help, we all want to do good in the world, but it's scary. It really is scary. And so I really believe that the more you grow into this idea, this belief, this truth that God has conquered death, the less you get bullied around by the fear of death. And I actually think that those types of things, those types of realities end up pushing against the forces that might tempt you into avoidance and tempt you into escapism. And so I think it's so important to believe those things that I think are true, and to wrestle through those doubts. And they're, like I said in the sermon, they're big beliefs, and so it takes time. It just does. So that's the first thing I would say. I don't know if there was another thing. Let's see. Oh yeah. That's. Oh, here. Do you have any thoughts on that while I look for my next thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so important to when we are reflecting on this kingdom that we are called to, like you saying that you can understand the temptation to just say, I'm just gonna chill. I'm paraphrasing, of course. I
Not
don't
much though. Not much.
to get into this conflict, and I get that, and I would say, as someone who is a bit more like in your face, I would say those who are more wired like me also have to be careful, because yes, we can see something and we can know that this is wrong, or something must be done, and we can rush in thinking this is the way we're going to defeat this. This is the way we're going to correct this situation. And we are not bringing with us the character of this kingdom that we are called to. We're rushing in like in our own power and our own strength. And as we've seen, and as you illustrated throughout the sermon, like Jesus flips all of that on its side. And so while I don't think like escapism is the solution, nor is just like rushing headlong into something thinking that we know how to take care of business, when actually most times Jesus was like, not so fast. That's not the way we're going to do this. And the people, the crowd were left going, wait, what? Like, we're going to defeat them how? Like, that's not going to work. And so, yeah, I think wherever you fall, and if it's somewhere in between, we all have to consider Jesus and consider his character, and not just respond and react as we normally would.
Yeah. That's good. That's really well said. I think the other thing that I had that I wanted to talk about is, and part of it is maybe I cut it out because I still don't have a really great way of talking about it, but I think how I would say it is the world here, like just the world on its own without God, we're we're trapped in sort of a treadmill of kind of danger and where people are looking to, oppress and devour and humiliate and all that kind of stuff. And everybody's trying to get up and move up the ladder, and everyone wants to be on top. And the world itself doesn't really offer an out from that, because if this life is all there is, then of course you want to be on top. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be on top? You know, uh, but if being on top changes your character, and the pursuit to be on top changes your character in such a way, in order to be effective at being on top, it means that you have to have a certain type of character. And if that character is incompatible with something else that exists, well, then now suddenly you're sabotaging uh, gold just so that you can get some copper. And that's where the scary thing is that in this world there is only copper. And what Jesus is saying is that no, there's actually gold, but you have to let go of your pursuit of copper in order to get the gold. And the pursuit of copper is horrible. I mean, if you can get the copper, there's some relief. It's definitely better than not having copper, but it's a brutal kind of journey to get it. Reaching for the gold is scary, but it's not as necessarily as brutal. And it's weird because Jesus is coming to these crowds who only know the pursuit of copper. They don't understand the pursuit of gold, and so they reject Jesus's offer because and we should empathize with them. It doesn't. There's no evidence that anything that Jesus is talking about or doing. There's no evidence that that would succeed, and so they reject it, even though, and this is the part that they them and us should all be held accountable to, even though when you look at the evidence for the pursuit of copper, all you find is misery and suffering and devastation and so it's just, I was really moved by the fact that as scary as it is to pursue God's gold without crutches and to face the world with the paper pistols, the alternative doesn't really have a lot of shiny kind of hope either. And so in a way, acknowledging how scary Christ-likeness and pursuing Christ-likeness is actually made me feel better, because it's still better than the oppression and the toil that the chasing the world's copper has. And I think I cut that out because it was a little kind of mushy, and there wasn't like a clear, like, this is the point. But I still think that is something I wanted to share. I have two more things.
Two more
The
things.
first one, yes, yeah. Wait, one more thing. The first one is, oh yeah. People might notice if they're reading the gospel accounts of the triumphal entry, there are some differences. And I shared, Luke has Jesus saying that, oh, Israel, if only you had known the ways of peace, and the other accounts don't have that. And it's interesting because in Matthew, Matthew sees double. In Matthew's gospel, on the way, it's not just Bartimaeus, the blind man. There's actually two blind men, and so Jesus heals them both, and they're not named. Then, when Jesus gets to the part where he needs to ride the donkey, there's actually two donkeys. There's a donkey and the foal. So, and so the question is how come? First of all, how come Matthew sees two all over the place where the others just say one? And number two, do not hire Matthew as your accountant, because he's inflating things, obviously. But I think the reason for this is because I think Matthew's account of the donkeys is probably right, because some of the backstory of riding the donkey, it's not just about riding the donkey to fulfill the prophecy, but it's also to ride a donkey that has not been ridden before. And in order to do that, you typically need to have a young donkey. And in order for the donkey to do this, you need to have the mother with to keep the donkey calm enough to do this. And so I think Matthew is probably right. The other writers are probably just like, well, it's a donkey. It fulfills the prophecy of the donkey, and we don't need all the details of the farmer and the dental records of the all that. So so I think that most of the gospels just said one. The blind man is a different issue, and I'm not going to go into the details on that, but I think that there's a reason for that as well. Then the second thing I cut out is I was very proud of this little metaphor or analogy, and but it wasn't worthy of being on the stage because it felt forced. But I want to share it here because it helped me kind of get a different sense of what was going on with Jesus and the Romans and God's people. And that is, when I was young, I was probably third grade, fourth grade. My grandpa Gerton, who was just a really hardworking farmer. And if you're in Minnesota, you've probably seen Gerton greenhouses, and that was his family, and it started Gerton greenhouses. And they also have like Gerton farming, and he was on the farming end. But he would just work the fields all day, and he always had with him a jar of peanuts and salted, kind of roasted planters peanuts, and he would just always throw handfuls of nuts in his mouth as he's working, and then he died of a heart attack. And I remembered thinking, and I probably watched it on the news or something. I don't know, who knows where a little kid got this stuff back then, but it was probably on the news or something about how salt is not good for people with heart conditions. And I remember talking to my mom and my grandma and just saying, I think the peanuts is why he had the heart attack, is because he was eating the peanuts. And there was a logic to that was probably there was the true, in a sense, because it is true that salt changes our blood pressure, and it's not good for people who have heart disease. However, heart disease is this much bigger thing, and eating peanuts is just one tiny kind of snowflake in the overall blizzard. And but as a kid, just noticing that, man, well, so then here comes Jesus, and the crowds are like, Rome is terrible. free us from Rome. Rome is our enemy. Rome is the problem. And what Jesus is saying is that no, Rome is just salty peanuts. I'm trying to cure heart disease. I'm not trying to just, cure this one little thing. Rome is just a bag of salty peanuts. That's it. And I thought that was a really good analogy, but I had to cut it. So I wanted to share it. So those are kind of, I think I have some other stuff too, but I think I'll just keep it at that.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I have to say, as I was listening to your story, I go from like smiling and, Dan, little Dan, grandpa, farmer, and then he's like, and he died of a attack. And I was like, oh dear. Well, that took a turn. But I do. I'm sorry. I'm laughing at I'm sorry. I don't mean to callously.
Dare you? That's my grandpa.
I know, Grandpa Curtin. But that is a great analogy. But I do understand there is only so much time, and you have to, present what you can. And I agree, like the nuances of the seemingly contradictions, some would say. I don't think they're like contradictions. They just they recount something slightly different. That is all very interesting, but I understand why you couldn't leave it in the sermon. And thankfully we have a show like today. I have a feeling too, though, like some of your other thoughts will come through in a variety of ways. Whether that be haikus or blog posts or further conversations on the MuseCast or whatever. Right. So I look forward to hearing some of that. As we transition, though, to the closing of our show, I am still just so struck by the triumphant entry, as you reminded us of. And I just cannot let go of the way you talked about the crowd and the expectations that they had, and just the letdown, if I could say, that they experienced. And I think of Jesus, and this just shows how carnal I am, because I just think he knew of these expectations. There is no way he was not aware. And for him to it's like, does he know? Okay, let's go disappoint him, folks. Let's get in there and get it done. But and he even had compassion. I think part of that, like looking over the city and just like, you don't know. You don't know what it is that you truly need and what you're asking for. You don't know what you're missing here. I really believe part of that compassion and love was because he knew that the disappointment was going to come, and they weren't going to recognize their hour of victory that was at hand. And so I don't know, it's not really a question, it's just more reflections on my part. But as I pose that to you, like, how much has that been mulling around in your mind, both as you prepared, but also as you delivered, and now as you reflect back on what you said, just that whole scene?
Well, I think part of what was really moving about it, and you're right, there's no like point to it other than just like this existential feeling that you get when you think of those people. And I think part of what that is I think that we all experience disappointment with God. And the crowd just so beautifully captures and saliently captures that heavy kick in the gut feeling when you feel disappointment with God. And yet at the same time, it's that part of the story that gets redeemed at the resurrection, where our disappointment was never in God. Our disappointment was always in our expectations of how life should go. And so for me, that's why I think that's why I wanted to really emphasize their disappointment. And I wish we would have had this talk before my sermon, because that really why are we doing the MuseCast after the sermon, Shawna? We need to do it before.
A pre-sermon MuseCast.
Right.
Oh, wow.
So that's brilliant.
Oh, wow. Well, again, I just want to thank you. Obviously, there is much still to reflect upon, and good news is it is Holy Week, and we want to encourage you to And we always want to encourage, don't just leave Sunday's sermon there. Like, take it with you. Of course, that's part of why we do this show. That's why we have the gathering groups. It's why we have time for prayer. Like, it's why we do all of these supplemental things, is so that you can really like embed what you're hearing into your bones. That sounds painful, but I think it's it's good. With that, Dan, I think we should transition to nugget time. I know you want to do your new dance, but we got to, nugget time dance. Very good. You get to choose though, because you gave the sermon, you gave the summary. You get to choose nugget first, nugget last.
I'll go nugget first. And really, I think the title of the sermon was The Problem with Palm Sunday. My nugget is going to be what the original, not the original, the second title was. The second title was, what do you want God to do for you? And so I think that if you go back and look at the Palm Sunday story and the triumphal entry, if you're in Mark, for instance, you go to Mark chapter 11, it's verses 1 through 11. But if you look right before that, in chapter 10, that's where you get the Bartimaeus story, the blind man. And when Bartimaeus is crying out to the son of David, and Jesus says to call him over here, that was actually the first time where Jesus publicly acknowledges that I am he, is in response to this blind man. And when the blind man is saying, help me, and this is where Jesus says, what is it that you want me to do for you? Even though it's obvious what he wants, and this is the explicitity part of the equation. But I think that is such a great question to carry with as you're reading through the Easter week, because that question ends up blessing and haunting different people throughout the entire story. The problem with the crowd is that they wanted the wrong thing. They thought they knew what they wanted, but they didn't want what they really wanted. And so I think that question is a good question for us to carry around with us. What is it that we want God to do for us? Like, what is our expectation? I mean, there are things that I want God to do for me. I want God to keep my mom healthy and Barbara healthy, and I want God to, bless our nation and all that kind of stuff, of course. But like, when you ask the question in terms of what do I expect from God, that reveals a lot in our heart. That shows us what we're really putting our trust in. And it can be so easy to put our trust in expectations of how life should go. And that always ends up leading to disappointment. And the bad news is it can lead to disappointment with God, that it shouldn't, because God never promised that things would go well. In fact, he promised the opposite. So that is my nugget.
I love it, Dan. My nugget ties nicely again with your nugget. So and it's about this expectation thing. And like I said earlier, we do have the benefit of history and hindsight. And so we can look back and go, man, they had just waited a week, like they, but what they were experiencing and feeling was very real. What they wanted Jesus to do for them, to them, was literal life and death. They were living under oppression, and they wanted to be set free. They just didn't expect for that freedom to come in the manner in which it did. And so I have great sympathy and empathy for the crowd, because I can see myself in them when I am honest, when I, step back and take off my judgment glasses and I put on my truth glasses. I can see myself in them. And so my nugget would be, see yourself in the crowd and ask yourself, what is it, like Dan said, that you were wanting Jesus to do? And then honestly ask yourself, where is it that maybe you thought you knew the way in which God would answer a prayer, a need, and it didn't go that way? And maybe you did experience what we're going to say is disappointment or hurt or a crisis of faith. I think we've all been there more times than we'd like to admit. And I just want to say again, God is not afraid of our honesty. He could handle it, but we need to be honest with ourselves and say, where have I put this undue expectation on Christ? Because He does answer. It just doesn't always look the way that we expect. And I love that Dan reminded us that we need to rest our faith on God's character and not on a particular outcome. Because when our faith is in his character, then we know, regardless of outcome, we know who he is and what he's about. And that won't be altered because, this didn't quite work out. And I know that this didn't quite work out can be really painful sometimes. But I also know that in that really painful space, Jesus is right there with us, holding us and going through it with us. So let's have our expectations in the right place. And that is having faith in who he is, what he is about, and how he has always shown his love. That is my nugget.
All right.
Amen. You
Amen.
Guys, Palm Sunday kicked us off. Join us for Good Friday service, which will be live streamed. We'll be taking communion together. So for those of you who are tuning in, gather your elements. Let's really do that all together. Wherever we are, and then join us for a celebration Sunday on Easter. Again, that will be live streamed. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the MuseCast. We love our Muse days, and we will chat with you 4 p.m. YouTube. Send in your questions. Link is somewhere down there in the perfect spot, and we will see you next week. Have a great one.
Palms to the ground, palms to the sky. Palms to the ground, palms to the sky.
Palms to the sky. He had to get it in.
I had to get it in, yeah, of course. So see you guys.